He sure looks like a handful.
When he gets like this, I just don't know how to make him stop.
Have you ever tried beating his ass?
Hey, what's up, world? Hope everyone is doing okay today, and tomorrow, and the day after that, and whatever. Today I'm going to look at some quotes from my favorite philosopher, Jose Ortega y Gasset. And I'm going to be looking at these quotes in order to get an idea about what's caused much of the insanity that we see today. And in order to get an idea about how we can go about reversing some of that insanity, and not only reversing some of that insanity, but also in order to get an idea about how we can go about shrinking the size of the state. Because even though I'm not an anarchist, I do acknowledge that one of the greatest dangers facing humanity today is the state. Now, before I move on, I just want to give a little background about Jose Ortega y Gasset. For those of you who don't know, Jose Ortega y Gasset was a Spanish philosopher who was exiled from Spain when the socialists took over at the start of the 20th century. And he was exiled for speaking negatively about the masses, and negatively about this whole socialist revolution that was going on in Spain at the time. Now, Gasset has been accused of being like an elitist, but really he was just an honest pessimist who didn't care who he offended. Now, I will say that it is very likely that Jose Ortega y Gasset was part of the club, and I believe he actually even admits to this fact in one of his books. But that's not all that important right now. What's important are the quotes I've picked out for us to analyze and learn from. So let's get right to it. So these quotes, most of them, I believe actually all of them except for one of them, come from the book The Revolt of the Masses. So let's get right into this. I have never said that human society ought to be aristocratic, but a great deal more than that. What I have said, and still believe with ever-increasing conviction, is that human society is always aristocratic by its very essence, to the extreme that it is a society in the measure that it is aristocratic, and ceases to be such when it ceases to be aristocratic. Of course, I am speaking now of society and not of the state. Now, the aristocrat that he's talking about, or the aristocratic that he is talking about here, it's not this definition that you'll find on Google. Unfortunately, Google only has one definition for aristocratic, and that is of, belonging to, or typical of the aristocracy. Now, the aristocratic definition that Gasset is using here can be found at the Merriam-Webster dictionary. It's this third definition here that means notably superior or excellent. And what Gasset believed is he believed that as a society goes from being notably superior and excellent to not being so notably superior and excellent, he believed that that required a larger state. He believed that as the aristocratic qualities reduced or decreased, it required an increase in the size of the state. And, this should seem pretty obvious. One, societies aren't created by people who aren't aristocratic or who aren't aristocrats. They're not created by people who aren't notably superior or excellent. They require that. And as more and more people enter society who aren't notably superior and excellent, of course, it's going to require a larger state to then manage those people. So really, if we want to reduce the size of the state, we have to increase the amount of excellent or superior people in our society. Now, in order to do this, we have to get an idea of what Gasset believed was this aristocrat, or what he believed was a notably superior or excellent type of individual. So let's look at some quotes of his that give us an idea as to what that sort of individual might look like, or how that sort of individual might act. So I'm going to look at this quote. Actually, I believe this is one long quote, and then we'll be looking at another quote. The masked man would never have accepted authority external to himself had not his surroundings violently forced him to do so. As today, his surroundings do not so force him, the everlasting masked man, true to his character, ceases to appeal to other authority and feels himself lord of his own existence. On the contrary, the select man, the excellent man, is urged by interior necessity to appeal from himself to some standard beyond himself, superior to himself, whose service he freely accepts. Let us recall that at the start we distinguished the excellent man from the common man by saying that the former is the one who makes great demands on himself, and the latter the one who makes no demands on himself, but contents himself with what he is, and is delighted with himself. Contrary to what is usually thought, it is the man of excellence, and not the common man, who lives in essential servitude. Life has no savior for him, unless he makes it consist in service to something transcendental. Hence, he does not look upon the necessity of serving as an oppression. When, by chance, such necessity is lacking, he grows restless and invents some new standard, more difficult, more stringent, with which to coerce himself. This is life lived as a discipline, the noble life. Nobility is defined by the demands it makes on us, by obligations, not by rights. Okay, so he says a lot here, but it gives us an idea as to what he believes a superior person looks like, or at least acts like. I guess he's not really telling us what the superior person looks like. This isn't Nazi Germany. They're not like, oh yeah, the superior person is the one with blue eyes and blonde hair. No, this is not Nazi Germany. No, this is philosophy. So, you aren't judged by the color of your skin or your superficial qualities. You're judged by the content of your character. So this gives us a little bit of an idea. There's some things that I can say about this, that I can criticize about this. Like I can say possibly why this masked man behaves in this manner, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to try to stick to what Gasset believes. But before I go on to why he believes the masked man acts this way, I'm going to be looking at one more quote that gives us an idea about the difference between the masked man and the superior man. As one advances in life, one realizes more and more that the majority of men and of women are incapable of any other effort than that strictly imposed on them as a reaction to external compulsion. And for that reason, the few individuals we have come across who are capable of spontaneous and joyous effort stand out isolated, monumentalized, so to speak, in our experience. These are the select men, the nobles, the only ones who are active and not merely reactive, for whom life is a perpetual striving, an incessant course of training. So this is Gasset's idea, that you have these two classes of individuals, and one of them is like basically just this weight on society, and it's a weight on society that requires the state to come in and then manage. But how did this weight come about? What created the masked man? Now, according to Gasset, what created the masked man is what he refers to as the rise of the historic level. He basically believes that societies have advanced to such a degree that the people who inhabit societies today believe that they're above all other previous societies, all previous other people. And basically, he believes that this has caused us to arrogantly and narcissistically throw away all previous standards. Let's look at a quote to see this. It is not a question of the masked man being a fool. On the contrary, today he is more clever, has more capacity of understanding than his fellow of any previous period. But that capacity is of no use to him. In reality, the vague feeling that he possesses, it seems only to shut him up more within himself and keep him from using it. Once for all, he accepts the stock of commonplaces, prejudices, fag ends of ideas, or simply empty words which chance has piled up within his mind, and with a boldness only explicable by his ingenuousness, is prepared to impose them everywhere. Why should he listen if he has within him all that is necessary? There is no reason now for listening, but rather for judging, pronouncing, deciding. There is no question concerning public life in which he does not intervene, blind and deaf as he is, imposing his opinions. So this is pretty much this idea of the rise of the historic level. It's not that the man of today is a fool. On the contrary, he's actually much more clever, has more capacity of understanding than his fellow of any previous period. But as Gasset says here, this actually works against him. It actually works to shut him up within himself. And it makes him say, you know what, I don't need to listen anymore. Now I just need to judge and pronounce and decide. And this is what he refers to as, a quality of the mass person. Let's look at the next quote to shine a little bit more light on this topic. So even today, in spite of some signs which are making a tiny breach in that sturdy faith, even today, there are few men who doubt that motor cars will in 5 years' time be more comfortable and cheaper than today. They believe in this as they believe that the sun will rise in the morning. The metaphor is an exact one, for in fact, the common man, finding himself in a world so excellent, technically and socially, believes that it has been produced by nature, and never thinks of the personal efforts of highly endowed individuals, which the creation of this new world presupposed. Still less will he admit the notion that all these facilities still require the support of certain difficult human virtues, the least failure of which would cause the rapid disappearance of the whole magnificent edifice. These traits together make up the well-known psychology of the spoiled child. So, as I was saying before, this is this idea that society has advanced so far today that it has basically spoiled the masses of today. And not just the masses. This doesn't just apply to your common person. This doesn't just apply to the lower classes. Like, don't mistake the word the mass man for the lower class man, and don't mistake the word an aristocratic person for like a high class person. They should not be confused. A person who's in the lower classes can also be a person with excellent and superior qualities. Okay, so Gasset believes that this was happening to everyone in society, including the upper classes. So let's move on to our next quote. I'm going to try not to put too much of my own 2 cents into the video just yet. I'll save my commentary for the end. I know well that many of my readers do not think as I do. This was actually the quote I was going to possibly bring up earlier. Whatever, I'll cover it now. This also is most natural and confirms the theorem. For although my opinions turn out erroneous, there will always remain the fact that many of those dissonant readers have never given 5 minutes thought to this complex matter. How are they going to think as I do? But by believing they have a right to an opinion on the matter, without previous effort to work one out for themselves, they prove patently that they belong to that absurd type of human being which I have called the rebel mass. It is precisely what I mean by having one's soul obliterated, hermetically closed. Here it would be the special case of intellectual hermeticism. So, once again, this just kind of further adds on to this idea that this is how the masses behave. Their arrogance, their idea that they are perfect has caused them to shut out the rest of the world. And not only shut out the rest of the world and shut out other possibilities, but it makes them think that they can have an opinion to something without spending any time to formulate that opinion or to think of one for themselves. And this is exactly how many people behave. They accept, as this other quote said, where's that other quote? They just accept the commonplaces, the prejudices, the fag ends of ideas, or simply empty words which chance has piled up within their mind. They're like, no, I got it from this society. Because the society is better than all previous societies, I don't have to think any more on it. And this is exactly how people think and operate. Now, there's more that I want to say, but I'm going to wait. Let me just read a couple of more quotes here. We're on this quote now. Is this not an advantage? Is it not a sign of immense progress that the masses should have ideas? That is to say, should be cultured? By no means. The ideas of the average man are not genuine ideas, nor is their possession culture. An idea is a putting truth in checkmate. Whoever wishes to have ideas must first prepare himself to desire truth and to accept the rules of the game imposed by it. It is no use speaking of ideas when there is no acceptance of a higher authority to regulate them, a series of standards to which it is possible to appeal in a discussion. These standards are the principles on which cultures rest. So now let's see what Gasset has to say about that. So he goes on to say, this grave disassociation of past and present is the generic fact of our time, and the cause of the suspicion, more or less vague, which gives rise to the confusion characteristic of our present-day existence. We feel that we actual men have suddenly been left alone on the earth, that the dead did not die in appearance only, but effectively, that they can no longer help us. Any remains of the traditional spirit have evaporated. Models, norms, standards are no use to us. We have to solve our problems without any active collaboration to the past, in full actuality, be they problems of art, science, or politics. The European stands alone, without any living ghost by his side. Like Peter Schlemihl, he has lost his shadow. This is what always happens when midday comes. But anyway, I'm going to save, as I said, my commentary for afterwards. So let's move on to the next quote. When all these things are lacking, there is no culture. There is, in the strictest sense of the word, barbarism. And let us not deceive ourselves. This is what is beginning to appear in Europe under the progressive rebellion of the masses. The traveler who arrives in a barbarous country knows that in that territory there are no ruling principles to which it is possible to appeal. Properly speaking, there are no barbarian standards. Barbarism is the absence of standards to which appeal can be made. And of course, this is exactly what we're seeing in the United States today. And this is, as we're going to see, there's another quote that we're going to look at. This is what's caused the decline for many a civilization. Rome didn't just have to struggle with the barbarians invading from Germany from the east. They also had to worry and contend with the fact that their own citizens were becoming barbarians. It is not that one ought not to do just what one pleases. It is simply that one cannot do other than what each of us has to do, has to be. The only way out is to refuse to do what has to be done. But this does not set us free to do something else just because it pleases us. In this matter, we only possess a negative freedom of will, a nullitas. We can quite well turn away from our true destiny, but only to fall a prisoner in the deeper dungeons of our destiny. Theoretic truths not only are disputable, but their whole meaning and force lie in their being disputed. They spring from discussion. They live as long as they are discussed, and they are made exclusively for discussion. But destiny, what from a vital point of view one has to be or has not to be, is not discussed. It is either accepted or rejected. If we accept it, we are genuine. If not, we are the negation, the falsification of ourselves. Destiny does not consist in what we feel we should like to do. Rather, is it recognized in its clear features in the consciousness that we must do what we do not feel like doing. Alright, there's a couple of more quotes, but I'm going to go over them after I provide a little bit of commentary and criticism. So the first thing I want to say is that when Gasset criticizes the masses' disassociation with the past, he is not suggesting that the solution is to go back to the way things were. Like, he is not suggesting that we return back to some sort of oligarchy or some sort of monarchy or some sort of aristocratic state. He actually has another quote that goes something along the lines of, we have need for history not so that we can fall back into it, but so that we can avoid making the same mistakes. And he also says something along the lines of, we need to have a class and publish books that focus on the mistakes that we make. And interestingly enough, instead of us doing that today, instead of us looking at the mistakes of the past and pointing them out, or having a class on mistakes and logical fallacies, instead of us really doing that today, we instead have classes that try to convince people that there's no such thing as mistakes, that there's just different lifestyle choices. And, it's like there's this breakdown of standards. When you don't have mistakes, that means you also don't have any standards. Because to have a mistake means it's a deviation from a standard or a norm or like an ideal condition. But it's not happening naturally. This isn't the natural product of the masses. And this is where I disagree with Ortega. Like, I agree with his description of the mass individual, but I think his theory that the mass individual is simply the result of the rise of the historic level is both superficial and hypocritical. It's hypocritical because Gasset criticizes the masses for thinking that the civilized world is the result of nature, for thinking that civilized society doesn't need the support of certain human actions. But his theory is largely that the masses naturally become this way, naturally become spoiled because of the rise of the historic level. And, this is a superficial theory because it fails to account for the human actions. It fails to account for the other circumstances and the many other factors that lead to the creation of a superior individual and a mass individual. For example, his theory totally fails to account for the fact that a lot of this comes from the propaganda, indoctrination, and actions of people and groups who Gasset would categorize as being excellent or superior. This isn't just the result of the rise of the historic level. This is the result of the quote-unquote elite doing this to the masses, manipulating the masses for their own agenda. Like today, the masses have largely been programmed to not only think that they're above the past, but they've been programmed to actually hate the past, which in turn not only makes them not interested in learning from it, but it makes them actively want to go against it. Like, no, those people were evil. We have to be the complete opposite of those people, no matter how detrimental it is to our society, our health, and our well-being. And not only that, but the masses are also taught that things naturally get better with time. Like, there's so much propaganda that covers pretty much all of these points that Ortega makes. And I sort of cover this, I sort of cover this in my video, Evolution Totally Debunked. Like, I sort of make, in this video, a theory that I have about why they push this evolution nonsense on people is because it convinces people that things just naturally get better. They don't have to have any effort, any action on their part. Things just evolve over time. And, that's all part of the indoctrination system. And not only that, but another point that I wanted to make about hating the past and or the elite getting people to hate the past is a reason why there are excellent individuals. Like, let me get to that point, okay? Because that's a perfect thing for me to jump off of. So, like, Ortega, not only does he make it like the mass individual is the product of nature, he makes it like excellent individuals are also just naturally available. They just naturally come into existence. But no, that's not how it works. excellent individuals are not a product of nature, they're a product of nurture. And maybe, I'd say the only possibility, the only connection they can have to nature is maybe if a person has like a naturally high IQ. And that even is not natural. I mean, they have to have a healthy diet for that and a couple of other factors that lead to that. But the point is that people who are excellent individuals, they also see that they're part of the environment. Like, basically the major factor that leads to an excellent individual is a person who has, I don't want to say a healthy relationship with their environment, but understands the relationship that they have with their environment. So, for example, Gasset has this quote that goes along the lines of, I am I plus my surroundings, and if I do not preserve the latter, I do not preserve the former. And some of them, are the way that it's on the screen. I do not preserve myself. But I've seen some renditions of this quote that say, I do not preserve the former. And I believe the quote from the book, if I'm not mistaken, it's supposed to be, I do not preserve the former, not I do not preserve myself. But whatever, not too important. The point that I want to make here is that the elite, the propaganda, the media outlets, they constantly make people think that they're not part of the environment. The other thing I want to talk about is Gasset's idea that the masses lead to a larger government. Now, that's something that I really strongly agree with, but he has this other quote. Let's look at this other quote. So he says, the mass man sees in the state an anonymous power, and feeling himself, like it, anonymous, he believes that the state is something of his own. Suppose that in the public life of a country some difficulty, conflict, or problem presents itself. The mass man will tend to demand that the state intervene immediately and undertake a solution directly with its immense and unassailable resources. This is the gravest danger that today threatens civilization. State intervention, the absorption of all spontaneous social effort by the state. So this is an idea that Gasset has, that not only do the masses create a necessity for a larger government because of their own lack of excellence, but they actually actively demand a larger government. They actually actively demand the state do its bidding. And Gasset claims that this is because the masses like to remain anonymous, or that, that they see the state. I think it kind of confuses it. I think that there's a couple of reasons why the masses prefer the state, and why the masses like to have the state do its bidding. And I think the two reasons are, one, I think it's because the masses like to remain anonymous. The masses don't really like to stick out, because when they stick out, they aren't really part of the masses anymore. Where's this other quote? I believe it's over here. Here it goes. The characteristic of the hour is that the commonplace mind, knowing itself to be commonplace, has the assurance to proclaim the right of the commonplace and to impose them wherever it will. As they say in the United States, to be different is to be indecent. The mass crushes beneath it everything that is different, everything that is excellent, individual, qualified, and select. Anybody who is not like everybody, who does not think like everybody, runs the risk of being eliminated. And it is clear, of course, that this everybody is not everybody. Everybody was normally the complex unity of the mass and the divergent specialized minorities. Nowadays, everybody is the mass alone. So I think this is one reason why the masses prefer the government do its bidding, because then they can remain anonymous. Then they don't really stick out. Then they can remain, the same as everybody else. And not only that, the other reason why I believe the masses prefer the state is because the masses are lazy. The masses don't want to actually go out and do the work that's necessary and do the work that needs to be done. The masses don't want to go out and volunteer their time doing some charitable work. They'd rather have some tax money be taken out of their income and then have the state do that. Or they'd rather donate to some charity and then have the charity make themselves rich, and then basically do very little to none of those actions. It's all laziness. It's all laziness that has to do with feeling self-satisfied. But all of this, like I said, comes from the media outlets. It comes from the elites themselves. It's all part of their own agenda. Now, one last thing I'm going to look at before I move on to what I think are some solutions is the prediction that Gasset makes. Now, this is the prediction that Gasset makes what will eventually happen and what has actually happened before. So he says, spontaneous social action will be broken up over and over again by state intervention. No new seed will be able to fructify. Society will have to live for the state, man for the governmental machine. And as, after all, it is only a machine whose existence and maintenance depend on the vital supports around it, the state, after sucking out the very marrow of society, will be left bloodless, a skeleton, dead with that rusty death of machinery, more gruesome than the death of a living organism. Such was the lamentable fate of ancient civilization. Already in the times of the Antonines, 2nd century, the state overbears society with its anti-vital supremacy. Society begins to be enslaved, to be unable to live except in the service of the state. The whole of life is bureaucratized. What results? The bureaucratization of life brings about its absolute decay in all orders. So this is essentially what brought about the Dark Ages. And this is essentially what our future will probably look like. What form of a state it's going to be, I don't really know. It looks like they're actually trying to kill both liberalism and conservatism. Who knows? Who really knows? So, what's the solution? What can be done about all of this? To put it simply, we have to stop acting like mass individuals. We have to stop focusing on ourselves and our own happiness and our own wants. We have to see the relationship between ourselves and our environment. As Gasset said, I am I plus my environment, and if I do not preserve the latter, I cannot preserve the former. And we have to start realizing that there's a bigger picture here, and there are certain things that have to be done. I've said before that I believe one of the solutions, one of the specific solutions, is that we have to sort of do what the Founding Fathers did. We have to have a independence renaissance. We have to revive not just the ideas, but the spirit that is found in the Declaration of Independence. And we don't have to just revive those in ourselves. We have to revive those in society. And that takes a lot of work. And not only do we have to revive those ideas, but we have to revive those actions. And we have to go about having basically an independence renaissance, where we go forward and we have these mock independence ceremonies, and we create a separate mock government. And this requires a lot of work. This requires being out and about. Not protesting, but simply engaging the public, sort of like what Socrates did. And as of right now, I don't necessarily have the time to do this. Right now, I'm trying to set myself up so that I can do this. And this isn't necessarily something that I wanted to do when I was younger, or not even necessarily something that I want to do now, because it does require a lot of work, and it is something that can get you into some deep shit. This is something that can get a target painted on your back. I mean, about 50% of the things that I do are things that I don't want to do. There are things that I acknowledge that I have to do. I dropped out of high school, and when I dropped out of high school, I want to just drop out of this whole system. Basically, like my sophomore year of high school, I realized just how upside down, backwards, and screwed everything was. And I was like, look, I got to drop out of this system. I want to basically become a hermit or a beach bum. And my plan was basically to go out west and basically be a beach bum. I would be like one of those homeless people in California, except that I wouldn't be all hopped up on drugs and shit. It is possible, and that is something that I wanted to do. But I came across this book, The Revolt of the Masses, and I realized that there are certain things that I have to do, and that life isn't just simply about wants. So basically that's my solution. Start behaving less like mass individuals and more like the excellent superior individuals that create new governments, that make history. That's what we have to start doing. And I mean, like I said, I'm doing it. I'm just doing it at my own speed. I'm basically alone. I got zero help. I got zero support, basically. And I'm basically making sure that I can continue to do this on my own. I can't rely on somebody else. So I'm making sure that I can get myself a job that keeps me paid, that keeps me well funded, and also gives me plenty of time off to do these things. And, we have to be patient. We have to be sort of like them. We have to be like the powers that shouldn't be. We have to be more tactful. We have to be more. We have to simply, I think Gasset says the following. He's like, the difference between the mass individual and the select minority or the noble is that the noble individual asks more of themselves. So that's what we have to do. We have to ask more of ourselves. And, there's a lot more to that than simply just saying I'm asking more of myself. There are specific things that we have to improve. There are specific things, specific actions and activities that we have to avoid. And of course, nobody's perfect. And of course, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. But, we have to get serious with this. Gasset has another quote. It goes something along the lines of, "Man plays at tragedy because they do not believe in the tragedy that is being staged in the civilized world around them." This is a very serious game that's being played here. We can't act like, it's just some joke, like it's something that's not seriously happening. But anyway, there's, I'm sure, plenty of other things that I could say on this topic. There are plenty of other things that I'm sure that I wanted to say on this topic, but I'm sort of out of time right now. So I'm going to end the video here. By all means, if you have anything, any comments, any criticism, any ideas that you want to add to the conversation, by all means, leave them in the comment section. I try to reply to pretty much all of the comments that I get. And if you really want to, you can email me. I have my contact email in the description. Unfortunately, I'm not doing videos with any guest right now because, like I've said in my previous video, I'm just really busy right now. But that time will come around again, and when it does, I'll let you all know. I would love to have this guy Johnny, who I spoke to in my previous video, on again. Of course, there's some criticism that I have of our own conversation, because I'm that kind of person who will criticize themselves. But I'll save that for that future video. And like I said, I'm going to leave it here. So you all take it easy, and I'll see you all in the next video.
Well, power to the people.
Fuck you.